Hi guys, welcome back. My name is Jaspreet. This week's video is glazing my viral platters. We made these a few weeks back and I will link the video for you. And I'm calling these viral because on Instagram, this video where I make these platters, it has over 7 million views. So in my book, that's viral. So we'll be glazing these and we'll be glazing two of these. Both of them will be brush on and I'll show the entire process of glazing the platters and I'll show you what they look like at the end of the video. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. So here are the platters that we're going to be glazing today. You've already seen how we made these platters. It's now time to glaze them. Now to glaze them, I'm going to be doing two different glazes. Both of them are from Spectrum. One of them is soft white from Spectrum, which we've used with the bowls, and the other one is soft red. This is it is a soft pink glaze. Really, it's called soft red, but it's actually soft pink. Let me show you what the two glazes look like. So this is what soft red looks like. Like I said, this is more like soft pink. So that's the plan for one of the platters, and for the other I'm going to be doing soft white. Now again, both these glazes are part of the same range kind of glazes from Spectrum, which come really thick in the bottle, in the jar. So it's a good idea to add some water to them, thin them down a little bit because they tend to be really drippy. The other thing is that these glazes, they have a lot more interest and variation when it's put on a vertical surface. Like this mug, for example, this is soft white. On a vertical surface, there is space for it to move and you can see all these variations in the color. When it's on a flat surface, it's slightly more tricky in the sense that there is a possibility that it will cover a lot of the texture and you'll not get to see much of the texture underneath. That may happen, but we'll see. This is like a test we're doing with soft white, and the other one is soft red. This is also a similar consistency of glaze where it does come across really thick, but I'm hoping it will work out well. So let's get started. As usual, I'm going to start with a damp sponge, and first just clean off the platters. Again, I'm going to just clean off to make sure there's no dust on the platter. I'm going to do that at the back as well. While I'm doing that, I'm just making sure, just checking to see if there are any rough spots. I can feel a few around the rim here. For example, this one. So what I'm going to do for this is take this sanding pad, dip it in water, and then just go over the rough area to make sure it's nicely smoothed out, right? This is just to make sure there are no harsh edges, because if there are any harsh edges after vitrification, after adding the glaze, it's going to turn sharper. It's a good idea to just get rid of them right here. Also on the base, I see a few of these little, I don't know if you can see, some little clay crumbs there, which is stuck on the back. So I'm going to do the same thing with the sanding pad. Just go over and get rid of any rough edges, uneven spots, right? And that's my signature, so just clean that off. Now again, I'm going to take my damp sponge and clean everything. Just checking to make sure that there's no unevenness, because it's still easier to sand down bisqueware as compared to a vitrified piece of pottery. So it's better to just check everything at this stage and make sure everything is nice and even before you go on to glazing it. Okay, just checking the inside as well. I can feel a little bit of roughness here, so damp sponge, damp sanding pad, and then you clean. Similarly for the other platter, again damp sponge and clean the surface to make sure there's no dust so that the glaze can adhere properly. And then we go at the back, again the same thing. Clean off the areas that need to be glazed. And we have some bumps here. I'm going to just get rid of them. Just a few bumps here and there. And when you do wet sanding, you're actually avoiding creating a lot of dust, clay dust, fine clay dust actually. So you just take care that that doesn't happen when you do wet sanding. So that is done. Again, I'm going to check on the inside to make sure everything is nice and even.
I think this looks good. Now let's start with the glazing process. I'm going to first start with soft white. I usually will first check for the lid, make sure it's nice and tight, and then mix the glaze in the jar itself, like mix it up like this. And you'll again see that this glaze is really thin. The way I've mixed it with water, it is really thin, and this usually gives me the desired effect that I want. But that's the thing with glazes and pottery, you're never 100% sure of what the final result would look like. So it is what it is. So here we have this. Now I'm going to bring in my banding wheel, and I have these little terracotta pots. So I'm going to just take one of these and place these here so that I can place my platter on top, just to lift it up a little bit so it's easy to move and rotate and just add the glaze. So I'm going to mix the glaze one more time in the jar itself, and again I'm using Mayco No. 8 fan brush, and then just making sure there's enough area for the platter to move. I'm going to start at the back first, and while the glaze is wet, I will go back and forth on the surface. As soon as it dries out, I just pull my brush away, dip again, load it with glaze, and then go over the base. Now this is technically just one coat, so I'm going to just, I think because this is on the outside and this is my famous drippy glaze, I'm not going to go in with another coat. I will just leave it at this. I'm going to take a damp sponge and just clean off the edges here, and I'm going to clean a little bit, not very close to the base. I'm going to leave a little bit of a band around the base so that this is completely clean, because this has to sit on the kiln shelf. Also, there's a little bit of a band. Let me show you the mug again. For example, here the base was completely clean, and then I left a little bit of this margin around the base so that when the glaze melts, it has a little bit of a space, like clean area, where it can stop. Because this is a melty glaze, I have to be a little bit more careful. So I'm just going to make sure that even around this, I have a little bit of a band which is free of any kind of glaze. That's the idea. I'll first start with making sure the base is completely clean, and then I'll start cleaning up the sides a little bit. So once I've cleaned the base, now I'm going to start adding a little bit of that ring around the base, the glaze free margin area. Again, this is, if I was using a Celadon glaze, I wouldn't have done this, because I would have still cleaned the base completely, which is going to sit on the kiln shelf. That would have been complete, that would have been clean, but I won't have created this glaze free area around the base, because Celadon glazes in general are a lot more stable. Celadon glazes are the translucent glazes where you can see the texture through them. Now these glazes, the ones that I'm using, are not technically Celadon glazes. These are your regular glazes. In fact, they're quite melty and quite thick, but when you thin them down a little bit, they are able to show a lot of the texture. You are able to see a lot of the texture underneath. I think the back side is done. Now I'm going to move on to the front. I'm going to mix in the glaze pretty well. Again, what I'm going to do is start in smaller areas. I'll pick one area, brush the glaze there, and then while the glaze is still wet, I'll continue the brushing motion to make sure that it's evenly distributed and it's not just pooling in one particular area. As soon as the brush starts to dry out, I'll then go back in, load up my brush, and then do the same thing over another small area. So I don't try to brush the entire surface in one go. I'll just pick small areas, work on them, and then move on to the next area. As you can see here, I'm just sticking to this area, making sure it's nicely, the glaze is nicely spread and it's not pooling in just one little area. That's the thing with these kind of glazes. They can pool and get really thick and cover all the texture. So I'm being careful not to let it sit in one area, like pool in one area for too long, and keep pushing it. Also, I'm not trying to dry brush. As soon as the brush dries out, I just lift it off the platter and go and load it up again. Now for example, I have to do this small area. I'm not going to load up the entire brush, just a little dip so that it's just enough to cover this area and it's not too much for the platter to take, because if it's too much it's going to pool and get thick and cover my texture, which is not what I want to do. I want my texture visible through the glaze, because that's why I added it in the first place, right? So now I'm just going over the sides to make sure it's all nicely covered. On the sides I'm going to do 2 coats, because even if it's a little bit drippy there, it doesn't matter, just making sure there's no clay showing through out there, that's all. Okay, good there. Now I'm going to go in with my second coat. Again, I'm going to go very fast. Make sure I cover a larger area with one load, because this is coat 2. I'm just making sure there are no bare areas, because sometimes that can happen when you're brushing so fast. There can be some areas where the glaze does not reach, so it's good to just check. So what I'm going to do now is just wait for the glaze to dry out completely, and then you see these little holes here, these tiny little holes. Once the glaze is completely dry, then I'll work on the holes to make sure that there's no area that the glaze has skipped. Though with this particular glaze, you don't have to worry about that, but then better to be safe than sorry. So I'm going to let it dry completely and I'll come back to it in a second. For now, I'm going to get to my soft thread. Again, same thing, I'm going to mix this in the jar. For this also, I'm going to take number 8 Mayco fan brush, mix the glaze well. And we start with the back. Again, I'm going to place something to add a little bit of height, so I can just turn it around and place it here. I'm making sure there's enough space. Okay. This corner. Again, I said this in the last my earlier video on glazing as well, that the amount of glaze to add, how many coats to do, how many times you can, how much you can push your glaze, all these things you learn as you spend, like as you try more glazes and you see the results and you understand how they behave. So don't get too worked up if your first few glaze loads turn out to be disappointing. They did for me, so I can tell you that happens. But like I said, the more time you spend doing a certain craft, more time you spend doing certain things, you understand it better. Obviously there's a wealth of knowledge available on YouTube and other platforms, you can use those. So again, I'm just cleaning up the base first, and then I'll again create a little margin around the base, because this is also one of those drippy glazes. And remember, this is the last part of the process, so don't lose patience or don't just try to rush through this process, because you know all your efforts kind of come to this. So make sure that you spend the time it deserves to get that finish, to get that look that you want. I think that should cut it for me. That should be okay. I'm going to just check and see. You can see here there's a little bit of that line. I'm just checking one more time. If I see a little bit of unevenness, I'm going to go in and clean that off. Again, it gives a nice finished line and it saves your pot and your shelves. So it's okay to spend a couple of minutes doing this. Alright, I think the back is done now. We move on to the front side. Remove this landing wheel and start again by first mixing the glaze well in the bottle and then taking a small area and spreading the glaze around while making sure that I cover all the areas. Don't worry about the areas that I'm missing. I'm going to come in and the second coat take care of those if I'm not able to fix it in the first coat itself. So don't worry about those things. So that's our first coat done, and this is drying out, so I'm going to go in with my second coat as the glaze dries out. Now we're going to go around the edges. Don't forget the edges. Just a quick dab like this. Okay, and this is my second coat. I think we're good here. Right. Now I'm going to let this dry out. In the meanwhile, I'll show you how to fix these little holes. Sometimes what happens is, because your clay, the base clay is really dry, it is really porous, it is really eager to take in any moisture that comes its way. So as soon as you put your brush, your glaze filled brush onto the surface, it starts soaking it up. And sometimes when the texture is deep or fine, and because you're trying to move the brush really fast, it will skip a few areas, or sometimes it will go in really fast and it will create these little air bubbles, right? Now for these, there are a few things you can do. One is take a smaller brush and go dab, dab, dab all over it. The other option, which can be slightly dusty, so please do it in a well-ventilated area with a mask. For that, what you'll do is, once the glaze has dried and your fingers are dry, just go over the surface and rub. So what this is doing is creating a little bit of clay dust on the surface, not clay, glaze dust on the surface, which fills up into these little tiny holes. Now these are not pinholes, right? These are just, technically pinholes in the sense that they are as small as a pinhole. So in that sense, yes, there are pinholes, but this is not an issue. This is not really a problem, but it can sometimes lead to some areas, looking a little bald and bare after glazing. However, this issue will likely not happen with the glaze, these two glazes that we're using, the soft red and the soft white, because both of these glazes are those super melty, fluxing glazes. So they'll usually cover up everything, but then I just like to be on the safer side and try to get all the little holes filled in with the dry glaze materials. And sometimes what will happen is, despite your best efforts, despite you doing all of this, there will still be those little small holes that will happen. Like I said, what happens in a firing you can't really control. You can do the best you can before you put it in to make sure that everything goes as expected and to plan, but that may not always happen. So, and I think that's what's beautiful about pottery, in my opinion. I think this looks good. I'll just show you the difference between the two. So this one, I'm not sure if you can see, the pink one has those little holes, right? This one doesn't have any of those holes now, the tiny little holes, right? So that's what we're trying to do here. Now this, I will wait for it to dry completely before I put in the kiln, and I will check the base one more time to make sure there's no glaze. Coming to the pink one, again the same thing. First make sure that the glaze is completely dry before you start doing this, and then with a dry finger just go over the clay surface. Please wear a clay mask and do it in a well ventilated area. I know I'm not doing it with a mask because I have to talk while I'm doing this. If you want to do this for long term, it's better to take care of these small things at this stage, so you're not sorry for them later on. So here also I've taken care of all those little tiny spots, right? So these will now dry completely. I'll check the bases one more time and then fire them to about 1200 degrees Celsius, and I'll show you what the final pieces look like after glazing.
So here are the platters after firing, and let me show you a close-up. This is soft white, and you can see we had thinned it down and we did 2 coats, and look at that. I think it's come out really well. It looks amazing. It did not cover the texture as I feared. There are certain bits where there's a little thicker glaze, but it doesn't really take away from the platter. I think it looks great, and there aren't any of those pinholes as well. And here's the back. Because we did just one coat, you can see a little bit of this brown here, but that doesn't really bother me. It's still got a clean margin around the rim. And let me show you even closer look at that. You can see the texture clearly. And that's a lovely white glaze. I think I love that glaze. I think that's fast becoming one of my favorites. So that's the one with the soft white. And these were all fired to cone 5-6. In terms of temperatures, it's 1200 degrees Celsius. And this is soft red. I know it's called soft red, but it's actually a nice soft pink. And again, being from the same family as soft white, I did fear that this is also going to cover the texture, but thankfully it did not. You can see the texture pretty clearly and it looks amazing. And here's the back. We almost got a drip here. So that was the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Now you have to remember that with glazing, there is a little bit of a learning curve. Your initial few loads can be a little bit of a disappointment. If they're not, that's great, but they may be. Don't give up so soon. You will learn your glazes, you will learn your clay, you will learn your materials, as you make more pots. So don't get discouraged or disheartened if it doesn't turn out the way you expect it to, because I know I was disheartened the first time I tried it. And this is the last part of the process. So don't rush it. Give it the time it deserves. So that was the video today. Again, if you have any ideas, any suggestions for future videos, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.